Warning: this episode contains extreme graphic details with body horror and acts of cannibalism. Listener discretion is extremely advised. Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmarish stories throughout Canada and beyond, and I'm your host Andrew. What would you consider to be a heinous crime humans can commit? Well, this story is one such crime. This is about the wicked act of cannibalism. This is the act of consuming the flesh of another human. For humans, the act is often a sexual fantasy. Eating a person gives the consumer immense pleasure. There is also survival cannibalism, or anthropophagy, where one consumes another to survive in extreme situations. Some examples are the Donner Party or the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, in which this act was necessary. Besides humans, there's animals and other species on the planet where cannibalism is natural for them. Like the black widow spider. After a female black widow mates, she consumes the body of the male to feed herself and the offspring. For this story, though, we are going to explore one person that desired more than anything to consume another person for pleasure. In March 2001, Armin Meiwes successfully cooked and consumed another person, a man named Bernd Brands. Over a period of 10 months, Armin would enjoy the taste of Bernd, until he was eventually caught in December. This is their story. Born December 1st, 1961 in Essen, Germany, Armin was the third child of Voltrud Meiwes and her then partner Gustav. Armin had two brothers. They were his half-siblings, and his parents married a year after his birth. Voltrud was a stay-home housewife, and his father was a police officer. In 1969, though, his parents filed for divorce, and Gustav left with his two adopted sons, when Armin was 8 years old. Up until Voltrud's passing in 1999, she was deeply in control of Armin's life. She had extreme misandrous views due to her failed relationships. Her goal was to make Armin completely dependent on her. She would dictate where he went and how far he was allowed to go from her home. After her divorce, the two moved into a 36-room house in Wüstefeld, a small district in Rotenburg of Germany. Voltrud forbade Armin from having any girlfriends, and was often known to humiliate him in front of other kids. She made him spend his majority of his childhood performing chores and basically a servant to her. It's thought as well that his mother pushed her own emotions onto Armin. She was born in 1922. For her, she would be around 23 years old when World War II would end. After the war, many Germans would have many conflicting emotions from this, possibly good and bad. So whatever Voltrud felt, it's thought she inflicted this on poor Armin at a young age. When he had free time, he would often sneak away to local farms to watch animals being slaughtered. For Armin, these were his fondest memories. When he did get to play with other kids, his favorite game was acting out the story of Hansel and Gretel, where Armin usually enjoyed being the witch, to which he would seek out the other kids to stuff them up and eat them. It's theorized that cannibalism is rooted in the DNA, and for some people, they are simply born with the desire. This game that Armin would play is thought to be the building blocks to what he would later become. Before Armin's dark desires blossomed, he deeply desired to be accepted, to have a normal family life, and to be treated like a normal son. Simply put, Armin wanted to be loved, and to have a hug. He wanted affection. And this is sad for a child to feel like this. No child should have to deal with it. When Voltred passed in 1999, Armin seen his half-brothers only once more in his life, and that was during the funeral. Armin would be alone in his giant home, to which he now was able to indulge in his desired fantasies, with no overbearing mother to say otherwise. Armin did serve in the German army between 1981 to 93 as a non-commissioned officer for the Panzer Grenadier Brigade. But afterwards, he did become an IT expert for a bank data center in Kassel, mostly specializing in ATM machines and computer repairs. He was known to be good with this skill. People knew he was the guy they could call, even though he was also known to be an unusual person. When not working, his cannibal fantasies intensified after his mother's death. Besides the cannibalism, he's compared to Ed Gein. Now I know Ed Gein didn't eat anyone, but what's often shared between the two is the immense obsession over their mother. Armin had made a shrine for his mother and was often dressed in her clothes. He took many photos of himself, some involving his mother's belongings. He was also known to take fetish photos of himself, often in the pose of being consumed. One, for example, he put his penis between two slices of bread with garnish, a little bit of parsley, and ketchup to stimulate blood. Other photos involved him in many poses as a slaughtered animal, until eventually discovering the internet world. This would be in the early days of the web. Some of you may remember that when the internet was like the Wild West, there were some interesting sites out there that were long before it became heavily filtered and enforced. Armin enjoyed perusing internet forums, specifically around cannibalism, looking for like-minded people. One site he was frequently on was called Cannibal Cafe. Like I said, some of you may remember the internet back in the day. You couldn't access it if someone was on the phone, and vice versa. Good old dial-up. The internet was full of weird things back in the day before it became filtered to hide the nasty stuff. There was many dark sites out there, many forums like Cannibal Cafe. We also had sites like Rotten.com that shared shocking videos of death and other stuff for viewers with a morbid curiosity. Also, porn sites were radically different than today. These sites had a secret name as not to give away what they offered. A lot of that is still around today, but generally is labeled before you click the links. When Armin found Cannibal Cafe, he made a post, and it stated, "Looking for a well-built man between the age of 18 to 30 who would like to be eaten by me." He used at least 2 aliases, one most notably called Frankie. Side note, Frankie was a imaginary friend he had as a child because of how lonely he was. Prior to the internet, Armin had built up his own philosophy for those he considered to be acceptable to consume. Armin only wanted someone that consented to his dream. He did not want to hurt someone against their will. He was against murder. It wasn't in his nature to physically hurt another. Armin was considered a gentle, nice guy, minus his cannibalistic fantasies. Babies or young children were first considered. However, since they can't give consent, the idea was quickly shut down. Females were off the menu as well, as he believed they were too important since they have the gift of creating life. So a male was the best choice, if they consented to the act of being eaten. He had no ill will in his heart to cause pain to someone, even though it's counterintuitive to his beliefs. Essentially, he wanted a pig for slaughter. He was hungry for lung pig. the nickname for humans. This long pig would be named Björn Brands, and he would be the one that would fulfill Armin's dream. After hundreds of interviews in February 2001, Björn would be the lucky winner. Björn's winning message stated, "I offer myself up and will let you dine on my live body. No butchery, just dining." The two talked over the next month, exchanging numerous emails about the act. The details involved the amputation of body parts and what would be used to carve his flesh up, and Armin's consumption after he was dead. Evidence shows a complete transcript of the conversation. They even discussed the logistics of when and where they would finally meet. On March 9th, 2001, Björn grabs a train ticket from Berlin and heads to Armin's home of Rotenburg. Prior to this, Armin requested Björn to fast, cleansing all toxins out of his body. All fecal matter was to be removed. He wanted his meal to be cleaned for preparation. When the two finally met, it was like love at first sight for both men. They hopped in Armin's car and headed back to his home. When the two arrived, Armin made Björn a coffee, and with some fine china that wasn't used since his mother's death. He also gave Björn a grand tour of their home, eventually leading him to the bedroom, where the two engaged in sex, enjoying the passion before getting to the main event. Since leaving the train to when they had sex, Armin repeatedly asked Björn if he was sure he wanted to do this. Remember, Armin doesn't want to hurt anybody, and he wants consent. Björn continued to reassure Armin not only that he wanted this, but he needed this. After the sex, the two got into a deep conversation about cannibalism, and at one point, Armin stared lovingly in Björn's eyes and stated, "I want to stab you to death, gut you and carve you up, and I'll eat you." After a while, the two proceeded to Armin's slaughter room, which was in the barn. This contained many meat hooks which hung from the ceiling, so a body could be hung and drained of all the fluids. It also had a butcher's table, so the meat could be cut and prepared for storage. There was also a video camera setup that Armin had planned to use. Armin filmed everything the second they stepped into the barn. This would be the key evidence to the whole story. Before they started, the two laid in the barn and stared at the shadows of the meat hooks that were given off. And like two giddy children, they discussed what they seen, comparing the hooks to clouds. And after a while of them getting to know each other, it was time to get to the main course. Before we start this next part, I want to give one more trigger warning. If you have a weak stomach, this next part is going to be extremely violent. Stop now, because there's no turning back. Also, if you're eating food, pause this and come back to it later. Upon agreeing to this arrangement, Björn only had one request. This involved Armin castrating Björn, not in the traditional sense, where the testicles were removed, but having Armin violently biting and chewing off Björn's penis. Going against Armin's ways of not hurting another person, he agreed. Björn got fully naked, and Armin proceeded to put his penis in his mouth. Björn then screamed on camera, "Bite into it. Please, just bite it hard." However, Armin was unable to do this as it wasn't in his nature to hurt anyone. Remember, Armin only wanted the meat. He didn't want to cause pain. Björn then screamed again, "No, you have to do it. Damn it, you can't stop now. Bite it." Byrne then got physical and shoved himself harder into Armin's mouth. Armin managed to bite a little hard, but was unsuccessful to give Byrne what he wanted. Byrne realized this wasn't going to work, and stopped this and asked to be taken back to the train. As the two got back into his car and proceeded to head back to the train, Armin tried to get Byrne to reconsider. The two came up with a new agreement and turned back around. Arriving back at the barn, Armin fetched a knife. He was going to now cut off Byrne's penis. Byrne got naked again and got comfy on a chair that Armin had set up. Armin gave Byrne some sleeping pills, a bottle of cough syrup, and half a bottle of schnapps. Byrne consumed at least 20 pills and all the fluids. The idea was for Byrne to pass out so Armin could get to work. However, Byrne never fell asleep. The only effect was removing the pain that would follow. Armin took the knife and swung down onto Byrne's penis. However, the knife only bounced off because it was dull. The penile tissue is very tough. It is not a muscle, but is cartilage, especially when fully erect. Armin had to fetch another knife, and when he returned, he attempted a second time, and this time he managed to cut into the flesh. After a few swings, he managed to cut off the penis, and Byrne experienced full bliss, having achieved his dream. Blood gushed out of Byrne's gaping wound, and he squealed like a pig after it was removed. One has to wonder, do you pull it tight, then cut, or hold it down? It's not easy to cut off a dick. If you heard of Lorena Bobbitt, she did it with garden shears. I would say it's all about the mental will. After Armin cut it off, he wrapped Byrne in bandages and the two would have a snack break. Armin put the penis onto a plate and the two attempted to eat it together. Byrne tried to gobble it down, but he had difficulty. Armin then put it in a pan and fried it up. However, a penis is not meant to be cooked because it turned black and charred. Both men tried to eat a piece each, but couldn't finish it, and ended up just throwing it out. This made Byrne a little down because he couldn't eat his own penis. To make him better, Armin said, "Maybe we can eat your eggs for breakfast." The eggs being his testicles. Armin then took Byrne back into his home, to the bathroom, and drew him a bath. Byrne climbed into the tub and removed the bandages, and the blood continued to pour out into the water. Byrne, like a child, played with the hole to keep the flow of blood continuing. Armin promised to eat every part of Byrne, and whatever he didn't eat, he would grind up and remove all traces of him. After about an hour in the bath, Byrne finally passed out, but he was still alive at this point. Armin moved him back to the bedroom and put him on the bed. A few more hours went by and Byrne woke back up, asking to go pee. And honestly, I have no idea how he managed this. When the two went back to the bedroom, Byrne passed out around 3:30 a.m. Armin got dressed up in makeshift butcher clothes and went to the bedroom with a knife. He kissed Byrne, said a prayer, and then he slashed Byrne's throat several times. Now that he was alone once again, Armin went through the 5 stages of grief because of everything that had transpired. He was disgusted with himself, he hated what had happened, and even felt guilty of what he did. But eventually, after everything had passed, he became horny, to now being able to achieve his fantasy. Also, since he had moved Byrne from the barn to the bath, he filmed everything that happened in the house. On camera, Armin said, quote, "I bet you can't wait for me to eat you, can you? Oh, you lucky thing. You lucky, lucky man. This is the best thing ever. Wow, that was something, eh? I really hope you're all still with me after that. Now I bet you're asking yourself, what the fuck is wrong with Bern? Why would someone want something so horrifying for himself? Well, let's dive into it. Bern was the son of 2 doctors, and when he was 5, something had changed his life. His mother was performing surgery on a patient. However, unsuccessful in saving them, they unfortunately died. Shortly after this incident, his mother was in a car accident, hitting a tree and unfortunately passing away. It suggested that she swerved off the road and killed herself, unable to live with the guilt. This guilt would pass on to Bern. For his mother's guilt, Bern wanted to be punished for the innocent life she couldn't save. He wanted to be destroyed. He wanted to be eviscerated, and justice would be served. Bern's only dream for himself was to be physically annihilated and consumed. As a gay man in the 2000s, he had a hard time as well being accepted, and kept his personal life a secret. Prior to meeting Armin, Bern had a boyfriend, and his name was Rene. When Bern sent out for Armin, he removed all trace of their conversations, so Rene could never find out where he went. Rene never found out why he disappeared until the day came that Armin was caught. But I'll get to that later. Finding someone like Armin was the greatest day of Bern's life, because he believed he would finally be annihilated and be gone from this world. He was obsessed with the idea of castration, and he believed it would be the ultimate punishment for himself and his mother's sin. These two were the perfect match for each other. They both achieved their greatest wish, and I believe the true character of this story was Bern. If you've been paying attention to my teasers and the poster I made for this story, I always included a particular song. Famous German band Rammstein made a song called Mein Teil, meaning my part. This song was all about Bern and his role in Armin's story. If you're interested, look up the translations for the lyrics. It's very fascinating. I thought this little fun fact you would enjoy. Also, I would advise you from looking up the music video, as it is not for the faint of heart. Now, let's return to the rest of Armin's story. Armin moved Bern's body back to the barn and placed his body onto the meat hooks upside down. Removed Bern's head and placed it on the butcher's table, thinking Bern would love to watch the show. Many buckets were filled with blood from the body, as Armin had proceeded to remove all fluids. He then removed Bern's testicles and said to Bern's head, "I bet you're sorry you won't be able to join me eating these for breakfast. Aren't you, Bern?" Armin then tied off the anus with twine so it wouldn't contaminate the rest of the body, and then proceeded to remove the intestines. However, he had to stop because he heard a click behind him. Turning around, he noticed the camera had run out of film. So Armin rushed back into his home, showered, and rushed to town to purchase more film. When he returned, he continued his work on Bern's body. He removed the arms from the shoulders and severed the hands clean off. Next, he started to split the body in half and remove the backbones. He continued his day removing the rest of the body, cutting everything into steaks, fillets, bacon, and even a large rump roast that I'm sure he enjoyed at some point for dinner. Armin took every bit of edible flesh and prepared it to be kept in cold storage. Everything else would be buried in his backyard. The head would be there but he decided to freeze that for the time being. For the next 10 months, Armin dined on human meat, 44 pounds to be exact. He ate it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Sometimes for dinner he would take Bernd's head out of the freezer so he could join him. He made steaks, meatballs, hamburgers, stir-fry, any recipes that involved pork. He even was at work eating his lunches around other people. However, no one suspected it was human. After some time, though, Armin felt like he was smarter, felt like he inherited Bernd's skills. With his new confidence, he walked around like a new man. After a few months, Armin had went through 2/3 of meat, and it was time for Armin to find his next long pig. He went back to Cannibal Cafe and made a new post. This time, he would drop the age bracket to 18 to 25 because it's thought Armin was a little disappointed with Bernd's age of 43. His next post stated, "Slaughter Boy Salt, are you between 18 to 25 years old, healthy, and with a normal build? Do you want to end your life, but you want something decent to come out of you? Then come to me. I will slaughter you and worship your body into delicious schnitzel and steaks. Those interested should apply with details of age, height, and weight, ideally with a photo. Frankie, the master butcher." Now he did receive a few replies, but none were willing to meet. I would think they thought this was just a game for fun. The thing is, Armin was looking for another Bernd, and if Armin was a little bit more violent of a person, he would have had his next meal already. One guy named Stefan agreed to meet up. Armin took him back to the barn, strapped him down to the table, and started to draw lines on his body indicating what would be used for consumption. Once the saw came out, Stefan realized, "Oh fuck, this is real," and asked to be let go. Armin released him, and Stefan wouldn't mention this to anyone until Armin's future trial. With no success to finding his next meal, Armin was starting to get worried that he would run out of meat. Now, Bernd's death happened in March 2001. It wasn't until a year and a half later, in December 2002, the authorities got a tip about Armin's post from a university student that had found them and suspected that they were indeed real. For 2 months, cops pretended to be other users and initiated contact with Armin, unaware of the time who the true identity of Frankie was. And when finally putting the pieces together, they obtained a warrant and headed to Meiwes' homestead. When they arrived, they searched the residence, finding the meat in the freezers. Armin claimed it was just wild boar, but it wasn't until they found the camera footage that Armin's crime would be exposed. Armin was arrested on December 11th, 2002, and between 2003 to 2006 he would go through 2 distinct trials. It became a global sensation due to the unprecedented nature of cannibalism by consent defense. Prosecutors charged Armin with murder for sexual pleasure and disturbing the peace of the dead. His lawyer argued for conviction of killing on demand, which is a form of illegal euthanization in Germany. This was because Bernd consented to the slaughter and consumption. The leading evidence to the whole thing was the 4.5 videotape of the whole event. The whole thing was fascinating because the courts really had no idea how to convict this guy. So in January 2004, Armin was guilty of manslaughter since he didn't technically murder Bernd. He was sentenced to 8.5 years to prison. Prosecutors, though, appealed the verdict, arguing the lower court failed to consider Armin's base motives, which were sexual gratification. Psychological experts testified that Armin was mentally fit, but due to his fantasies was a high risk to reoffend. So in May 2006, the higher court in Frankfurt overturned the manslaughter conviction and he was resentenced to life in prison because they considered the whole thing was murder, regardless of how it happened. The courts knew that if Armin got out, he would be on the hunt for his next meal. As of 2026, Meiwes remains at the JVA Castle 1 prison. His diet has changed since being incarcerated. Armin has now become a vegetarian. Well, I hope you enjoyed this disgusting tale, and it doesn't change your diet the next time you crave meat. As for me, I think I'm going to enjoy a juicy cheeseburger and a cold beer. Next week, our story takes us back to Canada, where I bring you a tale that's considered a dark stain in history in one of Canada's largest provinces. So, I will see you soon. Have a good night, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.